they put that out in Italy, a massive hit over there. And in those days, bands used to record in foreign languages. Once the record was a hit, they would then record usually a French version, an Italian version, German version. And RCA then wanted to release the Italian version of Take a Heart. And there was this big, huge stadium tour called the Cantigiro that went on in Italy. This was about the 5th year that they'd run this, and it was totally funded by record companies. It was a massive promotional tour, and it was every night for 3 weeks, no days off at all. It's literally back to back. And here's me, I was 17 years old, I only knew one Sorrow song, which was all we had to play. The crowd just went nuts because everybody knew the band, but we didn't know them or have a clue what was going on. And it was only one song. And it's literally, you're sort of standing backstage, you're announced on, and we didn't use any of our equipment. You know, everything's provided. You just run on stage with the guitar and a lead in your hand, plug it in, and that's it. Started playing and get off, and that's it. And that's what it was. And it was like Beatlemania. That's the only way to describe it. You know what I mean? You had to have police escorts everywhere, and there were all sorts of rules in this competition. Remember in the old days of the carnival in Coventry, all the roads were closed and people on the side of the roads waving flags and all that sort of thing. It was like that in every single town on this tour. Nobody ever fell out in that band. It was Italy that we fell out with.
I think he felt flattered and pleased to be considered the sixth Moody, but they did work very much in tandem together. It was a unique period of his life, of their lives, which worked really well, hence the core 7 albums, which are the founding blocks of the Moody's success. Recently I went to Sacramento to stay with the Pinders and was greeted with a mug Mike had prepared with a picture of him and Tony on the front saying, "Always and forever the sixth Moody Blue." And it's very nice that that's still considered to be the case. I think he thought it was a true statement of the way things were with them, because he certainly was given, and he was always very grateful, the opportunity to have input into what was being done, and they worked very well together. It was quite intense, and I suppose it was inevitable that it wouldn't go on ad infinitum, particularly as everybody's lives changed, families and people moving to different countries, etc. But it was a period of his life that he was very happy about, and he was incredibly proud of what they'd all achieved. He never assumed it was his achievement. He always felt it was the sixth together that made it all happen. They were prepared to take risks. They were prepared to try things out that hadn't been tried before, and to see how they could make it what they wanted it to be. They came up with a vision for each album. They had an idea of what they wanted the finished product to be, and it was not a prescription like the Motown idea, but it was very much they were heading to a particular point, but they were prepared to be innovative and to take risks to achieve what they wanted. And in that respect, I think they felt they were ahead of the game to a certain degree. I think he was always rather proud of that.
Tony Clarke was a dynamo. He'd got a hell of a work rate, and he was full of very creative as well. He would sit in his chair like this, as if he was about to spring out of it at any minute, and he was all like raring to go 24/7. He was going to succeed come hell or die in the attempt.
Legacy's in that, the eye of the beholder, really, isn't it? Certainly listening to the Moody fans, it is rather wonderful, and it was something that moved him immensely, that you discover how much of an impact the work you did has had on other people's lives, in small and in sometimes very large ways. He was very proud of it, and he felt very honoured and very humbled by the fact that that was part of the result of him getting to be paid to do what he liked doing, which he always thought was a bit of a cop-out. He used to say to me, "One day they're going to find me out." and I'm going to have to go and get a proper job. I think the legacy of the music stands for itself. The legacy of the man, he was a very special man. He didn't have any idea that he was. But if I tell you that I have a large family, and my brothers and sisters, when they read all about him in his obituaries, were staggered to discover half of what he did, because he was such a modest man. He never discussed it unless asked.
Delia Derbyshire was a real country music legend, and of course an electronic music pioneer, famous for creating the Doctor Who theme, but she did so much more.
She was very important because at the time she was at the BBC in the 1960s, they were just starting to develop the electronic workshop, radiophonic workshop, and Delia was a classically trained musician and also a mathematician and physicist. She had a great understanding of sound, and what she did with her knowledge was combine the new electronic music with traditional music, and also music concrete, which is using everyday objects in sound and putting it all together in a different way, just using tape recorders and then editing the tape by hand until she got the results she wanted. It's just relying purely on musicality.
Things that she did with tape. In those days there was no such thing as multi-tracking or even stereo, but she laid out all these tapes, all these bits of tapes, cutting them all up, all different notes, and creating such magic. It was just incredible, and we're very, very lucky to actually have one of her tape recorders. That's one up there, and it's probably one of the greatest objects that we have in the museum. Of course, in '68, quite famously, John and Yoko came to the city. The first thing that they ever did together as a couple was to come to Coventry Cathedral and plant the Acorns for Peace, and they had a bench like this, came along on the back of a trailer on the Rolls Royce and planted these Acorns for Peace. Sadly they were dug up within a week, but we now have some oak trees there that Yoko came and put in. Vince Hill was another proud Coventryman, of course, and snappy dresser on stage with his great waistcoats, of course, and famous for, of course, singing Edelweiss and having a massive hit with that, a #2 hit, I will say, but a great song. And of course he was very well known on TV in the 70s and before that, in fact, a great star from Coventry.
One of the great things about Vince Hill was the fact he was a Coventry man, and my family all came from the city, or moved to the city at a young age, and they were very, very proud of that Coventry heritage. So when a Coventry lad appears on national TV wearing his superb waistcoats, it was something really to enjoy.
Zodiacs were a band, a constant band, in fact, that's been around from the 50s, and they're still playing now. An amazing career that those guys have had. And of course we have one of the jackets here, and that jacket was used when they played on New Faces. So quite an object to have in the museum. Of course Rod Felton, what a folk legend he was in the area, and you can see his jug in the museum, beautifully painted, all by the man himself.
Back in the early 1960s, Rob Woodward was in a different band to me, and he also did a lot of solo work, and I was in a little band, and we got to know each other, and we discovered that we had a common desire. We were both very interested in sound recording, and we both said that we thought we had it in us to make a hit record. Our little studio in Kingsway was really a front room. It was the front room of Hilda Woodward's house, Rob's mother. And she was marvellous. She was a musician herself, and she wanted us to do well. And she gave us this little front room, and we converted it into a studio. We deadened the sound of the walls by putting cardboard egg boxes, which is an old trick that sort of took out the ambient echo sound, and we bought a little Philips tape machine, and our first, I wish I could hear our first recordings because they must have been awful, and I seem to remember we were kids as well as musicians, and we were messing about, and I remember Hilda coming in and Rob and I were making farmyard noises and recording, making stupid noises, and she told us off because we would only be 16, 17 then. And that's how the band Staveley Makepeace started. The name Staveley Makepeace was half Staveley, Standard and Staveley Ironworks. That's where the Staveley came from. The Makepeace is Makepeace, not war. It's just an idea Rob Woodward came up with. We had records out. We'd been very lucky with Staveley Makepeace, and we'd had a record out in the summer of '69 called I Want to Love You Like a Mad Dog, which got a bit of Radio 1 airplay, but it died. And then that was followed up, we did Edna. Now Edna was a really weird thing, a bit like Gimme That Ding that was around. It was all done in falsetto. Rob sang it in falsetto. And for some reason it did work, and it got picked up by Mel Cornish, producer of Top of the Pops, and he booked us to play on Top of the Pops in, that would be about a year later, about the summer of 1970. So everything was going really well. Our third record came out, which was called Smoky Mountain Rhythm Review. And we thought, gosh, we're there, because Muriel Young, who was she was the head of light entertainment for Granada, she heard it and thought, this is great. She booked us for a kids' television programme, and we thought by the end of 1970 that Staveley Makepeace was going to be massive, which is what we wanted. But in '71, it was a bit of a downer. This is a lesson you learn. You never take your foot off the pedal. We thought, we're there, we're there. The doors are going to open now, but they didn't. And so 1971 was a bit of a downer, a bit of a down year. And towards the end of that year, I said to Rob, I said, we've got a lot of novelty material and instrumentals which don't fit the Staveley Makepeace image. So why not have a little recording band on the side and record some instrumental things. We'd had this idea of 2 pianos, bass and drums having no guitar on it. We did a few songs, and one was Mouldy Old Dough, which we took to Frank Rogers, Clodagh Rogers' older brother, who was label manager at Decca. He played it to his younger brother Lou, and Lou said, absolutely, you've got to go with this. It's good, it's got potential. And we saw it as a sideline, and suddenly it was taken up by Decca, and it took over. It took the mantle and took over from Staveley Makepeace. It really took off, and suddenly we had to start thinking about getting Hilda, who was in the band, Hilda Woodward, Rob's mother, who we'd put in the band as a gimmick, and getting her dusted off and on the road playing. When Rob and I hammered out this idea for this thing, this song which we called Introducing Lieutenant Pigeon, that was Mouldy Old Dough. It was an instrumental. And then Rob, right at the 11th hour, he said to me, when we get to the end of the chord, he said, lean forward and growl into the microphone, Mouldy Old Dough. Now, bearing in mind the mic, it had only just picked me up. It wasn't a sound check thing. It was almost as if he thought of it at the last minute. And I said, what? He said, no, trust me. So I did it. And that's how it all came about. And then I said, what does it mean? He said, I don't know, I've heard it somewhere. Right at the beginning of 1972, we secured a deal for Mouldy Old Dough on Decca Records, and we did it on what they call a lease tape agreement. So in other words, we weren't tied to Decca. It was just like Decca put out every week. They put out so many singles, a lot of them were contract bands who were quite famous, and then they'd put out the also-rans, and we were one of those. And if they took off, good. If they didn't, they weren't. There was nobody promoted them. They were just left, you know, to fend for themselves. And Mouldy Old Dough was one of those. We did that deal on the 4th of January 1972. On the 18th of February it was released. At the same time we were on TV doing another Staveley Makepeace track called not Baby Blue, I was thinking Walking Through the Bluegrass. So we had two fingers in the pie, and it was all happening, if you like. Well, within 3 or 4 weeks of that, it was back to square one, because Radio 1 played, Noel Edmonds played Mouldy Old Dough on Radio 1 on a programme called What's New, and he said, I hope this isn't a hit, because I'd hate to have to say Pigeon's dropping. That was what he said. and that was it, finished, end. As for the Staveley Makepeace track, it picked up 1 or 2 at Radio 1 and Radio 2 airplays, and then died. So there was a bit of a gap, and I took advantage of, we had a little gap, we didn't have any live stuff booked, so I took advantage of an offer I'd been given in the United States to go over there and work in a studio. None of us knew that in Belgium somebody had picked up Mouldy Old Dough and was using it to introduce a current affairs programme every night, Monday to Friday, on Belgian television. And the inevitable happens, people would write in and say, what is this song? Because, you know, music's all about growing on people. You can play a brilliant piece of music to somebody once, they won't recognise that it's a hit. So it's got to get into their heads, and that's all. Mouldy Old Dough wasn't any special, it just got into people's heads, simple as that. Anyway, I came back on the 15th of July, 1972, and I was staying with my grandmother at the time. I went there, and she said, just, oh, you're back. No, didn't seem I'd been away just to the shops. Oh, you're back. And then after a while, she made me a cup of tea and said, oh, there's a telegram come for you. And I picked up the telegram, opened it, and it was from Frank Rogers. Nigel, phone me at once, you're number 3 in Belgium. That's what it said. What a moment. What a moment to come back to that. Of course, once it was hit there, Decca realised the potential, and they started paying Radio Luxembourg £17, a lot of money in those days, £17 a play to get it on Radio Luxembourg. That was payola, it was quite open in those days. And they played it, they paid for 3 plays a night for 6 weeks initially, and it took 5.5 weeks before the sales started to come in. So it just shows how much plugging you need to get a hit record. The number 1 hit, when it did come, was a bit of a surprise, because it had gone, it was 20 in the charts, and it leapt to number 4, and then it only went to 3, and we thought, oh, that's it, it's peaked. And the following week it went to number 1. I found out later that, again, it's politics in the business, that our record took precedence over a lot of others in the Decca group at the time. It was a big concern at the time. There was another record on Decca at the time called You're a Lady by Peter Skellern. Then there was Luke de Love, which was a UK record, Jonathan King. There was Donna by 10cc. Anyway, there were a lot, but ours got priority. So the presses were working overtime throughout the weekend, which meant the records were in the shops. That's another thing that public don't realise. If you're not in the shops, people got their 10 and 6 or whatever it cost in those days, and they go into a shop. I'll have a copy of Lieutenant Pigeon Mouldy Old Dough. They say, if we haven't got that, they'll buy something else. And that's how it works. So we were extremely lucky, because really, You're a Lady by Peter Skellern should have been the number 1. I mean, it was a much better record, beautiful record. But they went out of stock. So we captured the number 1, and we stayed there for 4 weeks. So there's a lot of little twists and turns. But actually, when we when you get to number one, I mean, our ambition was to get a hit record. The number one was the icing on the cake, but it does not sink in. And I bet you everyone you ask who's had a number one will tell you the same. It'll sink in when you go out to the fish and chip shop, as I did, and all the kids come round and, yeah, it's him off the telly. And you think, oh Christ, yes, of course. Then the penny drops.
My gran used to own a second-hand shop in Brighton Street, and just over the road from that you had Kingsway. And when a pop group actually were formed in that street, it wasn't just a Coventry story, it was a very, very local story. And Hilda Woodward was actually someone who my gran knew. So when she started appearing on Top of the Pops playing a piano, it was superb.
Mouldy Old Doe was a hit, and mainly the Benelux countries. We were always big in Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg, Australia and New Zealand, Canada, Commonwealth countries, yeah. They were the biggest ones. It was a minor hit in Japan. I did have a list somewhere, like odd places like Singapore, but Australia was our best territory because they had Mouldy Old Doe a hit, Desperate Dan, I'll Take You Home Again Kathleen, and The Grandfather Clock. We had 4 hits in Australia, so we didn't do bad over there. Britain was supposed to be the hardest of the lot to crack, and we did find that we sat back after Desperate Dan and waited for a little too long before we put our next record out, by which time the Radio 1 had forgotten you. They've gone on to someone else. So the third record, which was probably a better one than both the first two, didn't get airplay. And if you don't get airplay, as you know, you're dead in the water.
The story of Jigsaw's song Sky High, released in 1975 on a small independent label called Splash Records. They put some money up together to produce some promos which they